Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Art Tipaldi. I'm the editor of Blues Revue magazine, the largest blues magazine in the world. And today we're here at Don Odells Legends with one of the most inventive and expressive guitarists in the blues, and also one of the great songwriters in the modern blues today, my good friend Walter Trout. Walter, welcome to Palmer and Don Odells Legends.
It's great to be here, Art.
Good.
It's great to see you
here. Now I know you and I have known each other for years, and we'll talk a little bit about where you've come from. But right now you're out there in support of a new album called Blues for the Modern Daze, D-A-Z-E.
Yeah.
How different is this CD from your last CD, Common Ground, which I thought was spectacular?
I went about the songwriting on this with the desire to be a little simpler and a little bit more blues-based. On Common Ground and some of my other CDs, when I'd be writing a song, I'd think to myself, well, this is a nice melody. I need to put an 8-bar bridge in here.
Yeah.
And I was sort of trying to be creative and really get into certain aspects musically of the songwriting technique. And on this one, I decided to keep it very simple, keep it very basic and very raw.
Yeah.
And I also thought I would attempt to do a very blues-based concept album about things I see going on in the world and my feelings about certain things.
Right, right.
And so that's what I really attempted to do with this. I tried to make it really sort of a coherent statement from beginning to end.
Yeah, and what it might be too is it might be that CD or that record out there that is almost a blueprint for people who want to say, how do you make the blues modern? How do you make blues something more contemporary than something dusty and old? And this CD, if that was your intent, seems to do it, because you've got great guitar playing. The first song isn't Mama Crying. That's basically a 12-bar blues, right?
That's a 12-bar blues. It's a song I wrote about my mom.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, every song on this album has a story behind it.
That's right, yeah.
And that one was for kind of a memorial for my mother, who raised me pretty much by herself and struggled hard to give myself and my brother kind of a normal life in the face of a lot of insanity going on.
Yeah,
and, she was always, I thought, very strong in her resolve to keep going.
Right.
And, so it's a memorial to her.
Now, and then of course there's the last song, which, Pray for Rain. Every time I hear that, I think this could have been a Delta blues pre-war, or it could be a modern acoustic blues song today. It's just very timely too, with the lyrics. In so many ways. It's almost like you forecasted the drought that we're having now, but then there's also the spiritual rain that people need to refresh their lives. Yeah.
Well, that really was written, I'm out on tour all the time, and last summer we were touring the States, and already the drought was happening.
Yeah.
And I was seeing fields where there used to be, big green fields of corn growing, and there was corn that was about 3 feet tall, and it was brown, and it was dying. And there's a lot of that also in Northern California. The San Gabriel Valley there is, depends on irrigation, and they're out of water. And there's a lot of places where there were farms and fields that are now just deserts. And I looked out the window and wrote the lyrics to that, and then I really consciously tried to make it almost a song out of the 30s, maybe the Dust Bowl days, and play it in an old country blues kind of style.
And again, for those critics who say Walter Trout's too rock to be blues, they need to be listening to your new stuff, because the new stuff that you have is very bluesy.
Well,
at its core.
Those critics have always kind of cracked me up, because I've always thought they need to kind of listen to the big picture. On every album I've done,
right.
There's been a ballad that
Yeah.
I try to write, a nice, pretty, tender ballad, but there's always been blues.
Yeah, yeah.
And at the basis of what I do, it's always been the blues.
That's right.
And
yeah.
you know, but I always thought that if I could rile up some critics, then I was doing what I set out to do. You know,
yeah.
I do not want to be stuck into a corner.
No, no, no. A couple of other songs here. Blues for the Modern Daze, the title cut, is kind of it's almost oppositional, I think, to Common Ground in some ways, isn't it?
How do you mean?
Where the song Common Ground was about people coming together and believing in each other and to survive. This one is kind of almost a darker look at the world today. Where the other one seemed to have hope, this one seems a little darker.
The other one was a...
and by the way, let me interrupt you for just
yeah.
a minute. I think that song Common Ground is one of the top songs of the decade. That's just one
thanks.
I think it's one of my
you.
favorites, and I know you were honored with a Blues Music Award nomination for that album,
yeah.
for Album of the Year,
yeah.
Blues Rock Album of the Year. But it seems like that song just was so hopeful, and it made you want to rise above everything.
Sure.
Yeah.
You know, that song was sort of a passionate plea for some understanding in this world that we live in, which is full of, you know, polarization and opposites and screaming and yelling, and
yeah.
it's really difficult anymore for me, for instance, to watch cable news stations, because it's just people screaming at each other. Nobody's going to change each other's minds.
Right.
And that song was just a plea for understanding, but it didn't necessarily mean that I thought it was looming on the horizon, the understanding. I've kind of had this thought that things like the internet and the explosion of technology of the last 10 years, it's easier to communicate back and forth, but
right.
it's done nothing to enhance understanding between people.
Yeah.
It's almost made people on different sides, it's made it easier for them to find each other and wallow in their own opinions.
Yes.
Instead of trying to learn more or maybe seek out other ways of seeing things.
Yeah.
Blues for the Modern Daze, a lot of the tunes on there indirectly are about what I consider to be the corporate takeover of our country and our democracy.
Yeah.
I think it's imperative, whether you're a right-winger or you're a left-winger, or you want to see Wavy Gravy be the president, or you want to see Joseph Stalin be the president,
yeah.
that we get the money out of politics. And you see, I'm married to a girl from Denmark, and in that country it is highly illegal for any corporation to donate to a political candidate. And the people's vote actually has to be based on, they have to do the research.
Yeah.
They have to educate themselves. It's not 30-second sound bites.
Right.
So this is a long way of me saying the song Blues for the Modern Daze is about indirectly the corporate takeover, and that it seems to me to be more and more, as long as I have mine, as long as I'm getting my share, I don't care about anything else.
Yeah.
And the line, there's nothing left to give, these days in which we live, it's dog eat dog in the modern days. It seems that becomes more and more.
Sure.
And then the line, it's all for one and none for all. If you look into it, that's a direct 99%. It's all
That's
for
right.
1%.
Right. Yeah, yeah.
And so that's just the way I feel, and I tried to put it in there. And So I don't know if it's anti-common ground. Maybe it's a little more cynical.
Cynical, yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
I mean, there are other great songs on the album too. Lonely, which cracks me up, about people who are on their cell phones, that everybody's sitting around and nobody's talking to each other.
No, and that was written directly on a napkin in a Starbucks. I mean, I try to look around as a songwriter, and I'm always kind of trying to see if there's something I can latch onto and maybe put into some music or some lyrics. And we were in a Starbucks, and I was just blown out that there were probably 30 people in there, and nobody was looking each other in the eye and having a conversation. People were on their phones, and they were yelling at other people, and there were people Skyping, and there were, but nobody was just talking. It was like, is conversation becoming a lost art here? And I just have this theory that with each technological advance that's made, we give up a little something. And it seems to me that one of the things we're giving up is our ability to look each other in the eye and exchange ideas and opinions and experiences. And so I wrote that. It's a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but it's also serious too.
We were at a party, a neighborhood block party this past weekend at my daughter's house. There had to be 100 people from all over the neighborhood, and I stopped for a minute. I looked at my wife Bonnie and I said, there is no one on a cell phone. Look around. And there were teenagers and adults and senior citizens and people my age, and everybody was talking. I said, they're talking to each other. Nobody had the head down looking down. I said, this is a moment we should applaud.
Yeah, and it's a moment almost out of out
leave
of
it to
past.
Beaver.
You know,
Where does your responsibility as you're one of the great songwriters out there in the blues.
Thank you.
Your lyrics always impress me. The way that you pinpoint ideas and images. You always have. Most of your CDs are your own compositions. There's always very few covers. Where does this responsibility as a songwriter come from?
I never really thought of it as a responsibility. To me, it's always been a way sort of therapeutically getting things off my chest. And I have done now 21, I call them albums. And on all of that, I have probably done maybe 15 covers, if that. So I've got at least 200 original songs, and I can tell you that every one of those has a little story behind it. None of them are just some sort of exercise in songwriting. I mean, I even have one from years ago called Don't Worry About It. And it was, I was sitting down trying to think of something to write about. And I had this thought, right now, at this moment, at this time in space in my life, I have nothing to say. So I wrote a song that goes, don't worry about it if you don't have a thing to say. And so I turned that into a song. And
how do you know what songs to put on an upcoming album? You don't just sit down and say, okay, I'm going to write 12 songs over the next 4 months for my next record.
No, I write each one over the course of 2 or 3 weeks. I write under pressure. I get into a frame of mind, what my wife calls a zone. I can't be there all the time, or I'm completely, you know, not with reality at all. So I'm not a guy who's out on the road in his hotel room trying to write songs. I do write lyrics. I write lots of, if I hear a conversation or I look out the window and see the corn isn't growing, I'll pick up a piece of paper and I'll write it down. But when it's time to do a CD, and this happens time after time, my wife will say, hey, Walter, you're in the studio in a month. And I go, yeah, what about it? And she goes, what are you going to record? And I go, uh-oh. So in that point, she says, okay, I'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Right.
And she knows that at that point I go into, I'm going to come up with 15 songs. I'm not going to use them all, but I'm going to just go at it.
And you have the ideas sketched out for some of these songs already.
I have a stack of lyrics.
Yeah.
I have musical ideas. And it's almost like putting together a jigsaw puzzle. Sometimes, Pray for Rain, I broke out those lyrics that I had written, and it took me about 3 minutes.
Yeah.
Saw My Mama Crying. I sat down one day and just looked at some photos of my mom, and I thought about her.
Yeah.
And that song took 5 minutes.
Wow. With a song like that, Saw My Mama Crying, how do you decide on the musical accompaniment or mood that's going to go with it? Where that's kind of a deeper, hard, rocky kind of song than the Rain song, or even the start of Modern Daze.
Yeah, sure.
How do you decide the direction the music's going to take?
It almost decides itself.
Okay.
It would have been very easy, the song about my mom, to write it as a really quiet ballad.
Sure.
You know, but when I sat down, and the first thing I came up with was the lyrics, and started sitting there, I realized that I miss her and I love her, but I didn't want to get all introverted about it. I kind of wanted to scream that story to people.
Sure, okay.
And just belt it out to people.
Yeah.
And then it kind of found itself, you know.
Yeah.
I had a song that was the title track of a CD of mine called The Outsider.
Yeah.
And that is a kind of a rockin' slow blues. That was written initially as a very quiet, introverted ballad.
Right.
With this very pretty melody. It's almost Burt Bacharach-ish. And when I started goofing around with it, the more I played it, and I thought about the young fella I wrote it for. It was written for somebody I know very well, who was having trouble making friends at school. And the more I played it and the more I thought about it, it worked itself out of being this introverted thing into a
real powerful
kind of statement for this guy.
That's
and
cool.
these things evolve,
Yeah.
you know, and sometimes I'll teach them to the band, and we play them 4 or 5 times, and I go, you know, it's just not right.
Yeah.
We have to, I got to take these words, and we have to rethink this whole thing.
Right, yeah.